9:07 on a Tuesday morning. A courier van idled at the curb outside Callaway Fine Woodworks on Elgin Street, and the driver came in without knocking. He set a folded transfer form on the workbench and said 4 words. "Sign it. They're yours." The form was from Aldercroft Design Group. At the bottom, above the corporate seal, a handwritten note in blue ink. "These pieces are beyond salvageable. Consider them disposed. C. Voss, Acting Director." 7 clock cases sat along the far wall of the receiving bay, wrapped in moving blankets that had not been tied properly. The blankets had slipped in transit. The wood was visible, black walnut, quarter sawn, the grain running in long, clean lines beneath a film of dust, and one long gouge on the side of the tallest case that looked less like damage and more like someone had dragged it across a concrete floor without caring. Nate Callaway stood in front of the tallest one for a long time. He pulled the blanket back further. His hand went still on the wood. Not because of the gouge, because of the dovetail joint at the lower corner. Cut by hand, not by machine, with a margin of tolerance he had seen in exactly one other place in his life, his own father's workshop. In the house on Otter Lake Road, 30 years ago. He had cut this joint himself, in 2015, as lead craftsman on the Aldercroft Heritage Collection, the project that was supposed to define his career. 6 weeks from now, Aldercroft would offer him more money than he had made in the previous 4 years combined to get these cases back. Stay with this until the end. The driver took his copy of the transfer form and left without asking about the pieces. The van pulled away from Elgin Street at 9:19. Nate stood alone in the bay with 7 clock cases in the particular quiet of a workshop before the day properly starts, the kind of quiet where you can hear the building settle. He uncovered each case in order. He read the maker's marks he had stamped into the inside of each lower rail, NC, and a date, and a small maple leaf he had added because the project manager at the time, a woman named Aldercroft's own VP of Heritage, had told him it was a charming touch. He had not thought of it as charming. He had thought of it as his name, in a language only woodworkers would read. By 10 o'clock he had moved all 7 cases to the interior bay and pulled the roll door down. The next morning, a dark blue Range Rover pulled up to the curb on Elgin Street. The woman who stepped out wore a wool coat the color of slate and carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. She did not look at the sign above the door. She walked straight in. Her name was Sloane Merritt. She was 38, and she had been CEO of Aldercroft Design Group for 14 months, since her father's death had moved a position from his hands to hers before she felt ready to hold it. She set a single document on Nate's workbench. "My legal team needs a supplementary release, same scope as yesterday's transfer. Your signature, here and here." Nate set down the chisel he was holding. He read the document from the top. Not quickly. Line by line. Sloane watched him with the patience of someone who had learned, in the past year, to perform patience even when she did not feel it. "Take your time, Mr. Callaway. The language is fairly standard." He did not respond. He turned to the second page, read Clause 3.1 carefully, and signed both lines. He slid the document back across the bench. She had expected a question. She had expected him to ask about provenance or value, or why a design firm was disposing of handmade walnut clock cases through a courier van instead of a proper appraisal. She got none of it. She glanced around the shop as she picked up the document. The walls held tools arranged by type and size. A corkboard near the window had a photograph pinned to it. A long workshop table with 8 people standing behind it, and a set of finished clock cases along the front edge. The photograph had the color quality of about 10 years ago. One of the figures near the left end of the table had his hand resting on the tallest case. She could not see his face clearly. He was looking down at the joint. "Compact little operation," she said, and moved toward the door. Nate's voice was quiet. He was already turning back to the bench. "Are you certain you want to let go of case number 4, Ms. Merritt?" She stopped. Her hand was not yet on the door. She did not turn around immediately. When she did, her face was composed in the way that takes practice. The cases belong to you now, Mr. Calloway. The transfer is complete. I know, he said. I was asking about the other thing. She left without responding. She sat in the Range Rover for almost a full minute before she started it. She drove back to the Aldercroft offices on Sparks Street in Ottawa with the radio off, telling herself the unease was nothing. A craftsman who had read a contract slowly. A man who had not risen to her comment about his shop. A throwaway line about a clock case he could not possibly know anything specific about. But she had not told anyone in the transfer documentation which case was which. The manifest used only dimensions and weight. No numbering. No provenance notes. Voss had handled the manifest. In the corner of the small back office at Calloway Fine Woodworks, a girl looked up from a library book. Lily was 8. She had her mother's patience and her father's way of going completely still when something required thought. Dad, you were holding your breath again. Was I? You do it when something matters. Nate crossed to the old pine desk in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a flat portfolio, the kind used for architectural drawings. He lifted it out and set it on the desk beside Lily's book. I'm going to be busy for a few weeks, Peanut. I need to call someone tonight. Lily looked at the portfolio, then at her father. Is it something broken? The opposite. He sat beside her. Something that shouldn't have been thrown away. That evening, after Lily was asleep, he dialed a number he had not used in 2 years. It rang 4 times. It's Nate. I need you to come to the shop. There's something here you need to see in person. Ray Okafor arrived the following morning at 6:50 in a truck that had a cracked passenger mirror and the University of Guelph parking sticker from 2011. He walked into the receiving bay, stopped 3 steps inside, and looked at the 7 cases without speaking for a full minute. He walked to case number 4, crouched, and ran his thumb along the lower dovetail. He looked up at Nate. Aldercroft was actually going to destroy these. Nate handed him the transfer form. Ray read it standing up, then set it face down on the floor, which was the closest he came to showing what he thought of it. 10 years of your work, right here on this floor. He stood and faced Nate fully. There's something you need to hear. Your father met with Bernard Aldercroft in 2013. Before you were brought on, Bernard had seen the credenza your dad built for the Fairmont renovation, and he told 3 people that it was the finest example of hand joinery he had seen outside of a museum. He wanted you specifically for the Heritage Collection, not the studio in Montreal, not the firm in Vancouver. You. Nate had not known the specifics of that. And when the collection was finished and the board decided to shelve the program, it wasn't just a budget decision. Harlan Voss had already negotiated a private sale to a buyer in Hong Kong for the prototype pieces, routed through a numbered company in Alberta, the pieces that were supposed to go into the Heritage Collection launch, gone, 6 of them. And your contract was terminated in the restructure. Your severance was held for 81 days while your wife was sick. $1.8 million in deferred compensation and royalty rights. Boss told you it was contingent on a non-compete that would have signed away your own designs. You walked away with nothing. Nate set both hands flat on the bench. He was looking at the far wall. Sloane doesn't know any of this. She came into her father's company in the middle of grief. She had Voss in the COO chair from day one. He's been managing what she sees and what she doesn't. He paused. I'm not going to tell her. Ray looked at him steadily. You're going to restore 7 clock cases and let her think you're a craftsman she insulted. I'm going to restore 7 clock cases because they deserve to be restored. What she does with the rest of it is her business. Ray was quiet for a long moment. All right, what do you need? New glass for 4 and 6. Replacement movement hardware for 2, and your hands for 6 weeks. You have them. That same evening, on the 14th floor of the Aldercroft building on Sparks Street, Sloane sat at her desk with a quarterly operations report open in front of her, and her eyes not moving across the page. She closed the report. She looked at the framed photograph on the credenza, her father Bernard, at the Heritage Collection workshop in 2015, standing at a long table beside a man whose face was turned slightly away from the camera. The man's hand rested on the tallest clock case. Long fingers, a small scar visible on the back of the right hand where it met the case's corner. She had walked past that photograph 600 times. She had never asked who the man was. She turned off the desk lamp and went home. At Callaway Fine Woodworks, Lily came into the bay with 2 mugs of cocoa and handed one to Ray. Ray crouched down to her height, which took some effort given his knees. "Your dad builds things that last longer than most buildings," Ray told her. "He has a way of understanding wood that I've never seen in anyone else. These cases, they're not broken. They just need someone who remembers what they were supposed to be." Lily considered this. "Then I'll bring cocoa every night until they're done." Ray laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind that fills a workshop. Nate watched them both from across the bay, and for the first time in 3 years, the shop did not feel like just a place where he worked alone. By Thursday of the first week, Nate and Ray were running 14-hour days. Case number 2 was on the restoration table, its movement hardware removed and laid out in sequence on a clean cloth. Case number 4 had been stripped to bare wood and was waiting for the new glass to arrive from the glazier in Kingston. Nate's hands moved with a certainty he had not felt since before the termination. The muscle memory was 8 years old, and it had not gone anywhere. That morning, an assistant from Aldercroft called. Ms. Merritt would like to handle a supplementary matter in person at a neutral location. The Elgin Street Cafe, downtown Ottawa, 11 o'clock. Nate washed his hands twice. He put on the same flannel he had been wearing. There was a smudge of linseed oil on the left cuff that had set overnight. He did not try to cover it. The cafe was busy at 11. A group of city planners at the long table near the window. A pair of students with laptops. A man in a postal uniform at the counter. Sloane had taken the center table and she had not come alone. Her corporate counsel sat to her left. 2 associates to her right. A tray of Americanos in front of her side of the table, and across from her, an empty chair with a glass of water. Nate came in at 7 past the hour. He carried a folded copy of the Ottawa Citizen in one hand and his own copy of the transfer form in the other. He stopped inside the door to pull off his work gloves and fold them into his jacket pocket. Sloane looked up. Her eyes moved from his boots to the oil mark on his cuff, to the callous lines on his palms. She said, at a volume that carried to the next table, "Mr. Callaway, when meeting with legal counsel, most people find time to change into something that doesn't belong in a job site. Or is that distinction not made in this neighborhood?" One of the associates smiled briefly. The table of city planners went quiet. A man 2 tables away shifted in his chair. Nate crossed the room at an even pace. He pulled out the chair opposite Sloane and sat down. He set his newspaper on the table. He reached for the top document. "May I read this?" "Of course. We have nowhere pressing to be." He read Clause 1. He read Clause 2. He turned to Clause 3.1 and read it twice. He turned to the signature page, took the pen the counsel offered, and signed without comment. He pushed the folder back across the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from her. "Are you certain you want to let go of case number 4, Ms. Merritt?" Sloane's hand stopped on her coffee cup before it reached her mouth. She had heard him say that sentence once before in a different room, and she had told herself it was meaningless. In the cafe, it was not meaningless. She felt something settle cold along her spine, and she could not immediately say why. Nate stood, tucked the newspaper under his arm, nodded once to the counsel, and walked back out through the door. Sloane sat very still. Her Americano was cold. The associate tried to pick up the room and couldn't find the footing. One of the city planners at the long table watched her as she gathered her own folios, which she never did, and walked out ahead of her attorneys. She drove back to the office with the radio off and did not take the highway. She told herself the discomfort was about nothing. A craftsman who read legal documents carefully. A man who had not flinched when she intended him to flinch. The comment about Case 4 was coincidence, but she had not numbered the cases in any documentation. The manifest used only dimensions. The only person who had handled the manifest was Voss. How did Nate Callaway know there was a case number 4? By the start of the second week, She had her personal attorney, not corporate counsel, reviewing every disposal contract processed through Aldercroft in the past 4 years. 3 of them contained a non-standard clause granting the receiving party full discretionary rights with no recovery option. All 3 had been approved under Sloane's delegated authority, a broad signing power she had granted Voss in her second week as CEO, when she had been too submerged in probate and grief to read every document that crossed her desk. She read her father's will again that night, slowly, with a pencil. She found a clause she had skimmed past in the first weeks. The heritage collection pieces, in any form or medium, shall not be disposed of, transferred, or liquidated without the written consent of the original lead craftsman of record. She read it 3 times. She underlined original. She underlined lead craftsman of record. She did not know who that was. She had never thought to ask. On Wednesday, she drove to Elgin Street without telling her office. She walked into the shop at 3:30, and the first thing she saw was Ray Okafor standing at the parts table, sorting small brass mechanisms into 2 trays, one labeled Keep, one labeled Replace. She knew him. He had spent 19 years as senior conservator at the Canadian Museum of History. She had seen him at her father's memorial service. He had stood near the back and had not come forward. Mr. Okafor. Ray looked up. He glanced at Nate, who gave the smallest nod, and looked back at Sloane. Miss Merritt. What brings you here? I'm helping a colleague. She turned to Nate. He was at the restoration table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a set of dental picks arranged beside him on a cloth. Case number 4 sat in its cradle beside him, the wood cleaned back to its natural color, the grain visible and warm under the shop light. Who are you, Mr. Calloway? A woodworker. Woodworkers don't get Ray Okafor driving in from Gatineau to sort brass fittings for free. Nate set down the pick. He looked at her for a moment. He did not answer. She held his gaze. She did not feel anger. She felt something else. The particular discomfort of being the person in the room who knows the least about what is happening. She left without asking again. That night, she held the framed photograph from her credenza under the desk lamp. The man at the long table whose face was slightly turned away. His hand on the top of the tallest case. Long fingers, the work-worn kind. A small scar on the back of the right hand, visible just above the knuckle where the light caught it. She had seen that scar 3 days ago in an Ottawa cafe, holding a pen. In the 3rd week, Sloane came to the shop 3 times. She did not announce a reason. The first visit she sat in the wooden chair in the back office and drank the coffee Nate had on the burner, which was strong and not particularly good, and said almost nothing. The second time she brought a report she said she needed to finish and read half of it. The 3rd time she stood in the bay doorway and watched Nate work the filler on case number 3. A deep patience in how he applied it, layer by thin layer, waiting between each one. Lily came in from school at 4. She dropped her backpack on the office chair, walked into the bay, saw Sloane, and stalked. You came back. I did. Do you want to see the cases? Dad's teaching me which wood does what. Sloane opened her mouth to say she didn't have time. She said she did. They sat in the office with a field guide to North American hardwoods open on the low table between them. Lily explained why quarter sawn oak moves less than flat sawn, and why walnut was her favorite because it smelled like something old and important. Sloane laughed once. A short, surprised sound. It was the first time she had laughed since her father died. At the bench, Nate slowed his hands. He did not look up. He wiped the same section of case 4 3 times. The following morning, she drove to Gatineau and parked outside Ray Okafor's house. She rang the bell. Ray answered in an old Aldercroft Heritage Program fleece with a coffee stain on the sleeve. Mr. Okafor, who was the original lead craftsman of record for the Heritage Collection. Ray looked at her for a long moment. He had signed a confidentiality agreement that had long outlived its purpose. You've already met him. Where? You know where. She drove back toward Elgin Street, but did not go in. She parked 200 meters east and watched the light come through the bay window. She could see Nate showing Lily how to read the grain direction on a piece of scrap walnut. She could see him laugh at something the girl said, the laugh brief and real, the kind that doesn't know it's being seen. She did not go in. Friday morning, Voss appeared in her office with a file folder and a careful, pleasant expression. "We have a situation with the Callaway transfer." He set the folder on her desk. On top was a copy of a non-compete agreement dated 2016. Below it, a legal opinion. If Callaway completes restoration to Heritage Collection specification, the non-compete language gives us grounds to claim the completed work, recover all 7 pieces, and seek damages for the restoration costs he incurred. We move the moment the first case is finished. He was smiling in the way of someone who has already decided the outcome. We recover the collection. We control the narrative. He loses the shop. Sloane looked at the folder. She looked at the non-compete. She looked at Voss. "Thank you, Harlan. Leave it with me." When he was gone, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and put the folder inside it and turned the key. She sat for a moment with her hands still. Voss had built this file. Voss knew exactly who Nate Callaway was. Voss had still approved the disposal order, which meant Voss had wanted Nate to receive those cases, and Voss had a plan for what happened when the cases were done. On the Monday of the 4th week, Sloane drove to Elgin Street with a flat wooden box on the passenger seat. It was 14 inches wide, cedar, with a brass clasp and small hinges that had gone a soft green. She had found it in her father's personal filing cabinet 6 weeks after the funeral, behind a set of folders she had not had the will to open until last night. The key had been taped to the underside of his desk drawer. She had felt it with her hand 3 months ago and thought it was a repair patch. She set the box on the restoration bench in front of Nate. "My father kept this in his private cabinet. I have not opened it. I would like to open it with you." Nate dried his hands on a clean cloth. He undid the clasp. Inside were 3 things: a letter on Bernard Aldercroft's personal stationery, cream paper, a small embossed A in the upper corner, folded once, a black USB drive on a key ring with a numbered tag, and a sealed envelope marked "Addendum" in Bernard's handwriting, the letters leaning slightly forward. Sloane unfolded the letter first. She read it aloud, her voice steady through the first paragraph and quieter through the rest. Bernard had written it in March of 2017. It was addressed to his private solicitor and had never been sent. Bernard had discovered through an internal audit he had commissioned without telling the board that Harlan Voss had been processing false disposal orders since 2014. The assets, prototype heritage pieces and archival workshop furniture, had not been destroyed. They had been sold privately through a numbered company in Calgary to collectors in Hong Kong and Singapore, with wire transfers routed through accounts in the Cayman Islands. The letter included wire dates, account numbers, and the names of 2 brokers who had handled the transfers. Bernard had written that he intended to terminate Voss in April of 2017. He had also written that he intended to reinstate Nate Callaway as lead craftsman with full restoration of the $1.8 million in deferred compensation and royalties that had been withheld, plus interest. He had died of a stroke 11 days after writing the letter, the day after Sloane's 37th birthday. She set the letter on the bench. Her hand did not shake. Her breath was not steady. The addendum envelope held a notarized document, witnessed and sealed. It named Nate Callaway as Heritage Conservator in perpetuity with a 14% equity interest in Aldercroft Heritage Holdings, contingent on the formal reinstatement of the Heritage Collection Program. The USB held the full ledger of Voss's false disposal contracts, names, buyers, wire dates, cross-referenced against internal Aldercroft manifests, every transaction in order. 9 years of it. Sloane did not cry. Her hands came to rest on the bench, one on either side of the open box. "I signed a release giving you 7 pieces worth more than this building for the cost of a courier transfer. I told you to wash your shirt before meeting with my attorneys." She stopped. "I was a fool." "You weren't a fool. You were managed. There's a difference." "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" "Because you didn't know who I was, and telling you without proof would have looked like exactly what Voss would have wanted it to look like. A craftsman making a claim in a shop on Elgin Street with nothing behind it but his own word. I needed to save those cases whether you believed me or not." She looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light came through the bay window and caught the line of his jaw, the gray beginning at his temple, the scar across the back of his right hand resting on the bench. My father chose you. Your father was a serious man. He cared about what lasts. He never told me about the addendum. I didn't know about it either. I would have refused it if he had told me. You would have refused 14% equity. I would have refused anything that made it feel like a transaction. The work was never a transaction. Lily came through the office door with 2 mugs. She handed one to Sloan. The cocoa had a marshmallow floating slightly to one side, the way a child pours when they're being very careful. Dad says when something is hard, you need something warm to hold. Sloan took the mug. She held it in both hands for a long time without drinking. That night, from the parking lot outside a grocery store on Bank Street, she called her personal solicitor. Emergency meeting, 7 tomorrow morning. Every disposal contract from the last 4 years. Do not involve anyone from the corporate office. Especially not Harlan. By the end of the 5th week, case number 1 was in the finishing bay. Nate had built the space himself in 2021, a small room at the back of the shop, climate-controlled, with a threshold seal he had sourced from a furniture conservator in Toronto. He had paid for the humidity system in 3 installments over 7 months. He applied the final coat of oil by hand, long strokes, even pressure, the smell of Danish oil and warmed walnut filling the room. He had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 2 weeks. His hands were certain. Lily sat on a stool in the doorway with a book on her lap and her ear protection hanging loose around her neck. Ray stood near the door with a coffee, watching the work in the particular way of someone who has spent a lifetime knowing what good looks like. Sloan stood beside Nate, 3 feet from the case itself. She had taken off her wool coat. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He had not seen her do that before. I want to apply the last coat. He looked at her. My father always had someone outside the craft touch the final piece. He said it was how you knew the work was ready for the world, when it didn't need you to protect it anymore. She took the cloth. She looked at him once. He nodded. She applied the oil slowly, following the grain from the top rail down. Her hands were careful and unpracticed in the way that meant she was paying full attention. The walnut darkened under the oil in a long, warm wave, the grain coming forward. Ray exhaled. It was almost a laugh. When it was done, Sloan set the cloth on the bench. She stood back. She looked at the case she had signed away for the cost of a courier transfer, finished, standing straight, the glass clean, the movement visible behind it. She picked up her phone and walked to the corner of the room. Mr. Pellerin, it's Sloan Merritt. I have 7 restored Heritage Collection pieces, all 7, verified to original specification and above, all walnut, all hand joinery, all original craftsmen. She listened. The lead craftsman is Nate Calloway. Yes, the original. The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment, and then it was not quiet at all. I'll take all 7. 600,000 each. Full amount. I can have the transfer wired by morning and my conservator in Ottawa by Thursday. She set the phone on the bench. She walked back to Nate. He had not moved. You didn't need me to broker that. You could have called Pellerin the day I left the first time. You needed to be the one to call. Why? Because your father built the program. The collection belongs to Aldercroft's history, which means it belongs to you. I built the cases, the decision about what they're worth. That was never mine to make. She did not answer for a moment. She put her hand on the side of the finished case and left it there until the warmth from her palm was the same as the warmth from the wood. That Monday evening, Voss came to her office with 2 of his attorneys and a sealed envelope and the expression of someone who believes they have already won. Calloway completed the first case Friday. We're ready to file. He set the envelope on her desk. He loses the shop. We recover the collection. Queen outcome. Sloan slid an unmarked folder across the desk, not the folder he had given her 3 weeks earlier. He opened it. The first page was a wire transfer record from a Hong Kong numbered account. October 2014. Signed Harlan R. Voss. The color left his face by the 3rd page. By the 6th page, his hands were not steady. She pressed the intercom. "Security, please come to the 14th floor." She did not watch him leave. The Wednesday after, Sloane walked into the Aldercroft boardroom with 3 folders and Nate beside her. He wore a clean flannel. He did not pretend it was a suit. The board had been told only that the meeting concerned a fiduciary matter of significant scope and that the COO would not be attending. There were 11 board members. 4 had known Bernard. Sloane laid out the evidence in 38 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. The false disposal contracts, the Hong Kong and Singapore wire transfers, the Calgary numbered company, the $1.8 million withheld from Nate's deferred compensation in 2016, traced to a shell account Voss controlled. Ray Okafor's signed statement, notarized that morning. The Bernard letter. The addendum. The board was very still. When she finished, the silence ran for nearly a minute. Someone near the end of the table asked about the transfer from Pellerin, $4.2 million, received that morning. Full amount, deposited to the Aldercroft Heritage operating account. No commission taken by Callaway Fine Woodworks. Nate had waived it in writing before the transfer cleared. Who restored the collection? Sloane nodded toward Nate. The original lead craftsman of record. The man my father sought out personally in 2013 and was unable to reinstate before he died. She presented the addendum. 14% equity, heritage conservator in perpetuity. The vote was unanimous. One of the 4 board members who had known Bernard, a woman who had been on the board for 22 years, stood, walked to Nate, and shook his hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The Heritage Collection program was reinstated by board resolution before the meeting ended. Nate was named lead craftsman and heritage conservator, reporting directly to the CEO. The $1.8 million in withheld compensation was authorized for disbursement with compounded interest from the date of withholding. Voss was referred to the RCMP the following day. His accounts were frozen pending forfeiture. The press release went out Friday morning, drafted by Sloane herself. After the meeting, Nate and Sloane walked together to the parking structure below the building. The afternoon light came in low through the concrete levels, falling across the painted lines in long diagonals. "You're not moving to Ottawa. Lily's school is in Ottawa." She stopped walking. "Lily's school is here. Her school is on Baseline Road. We live 12 minutes from the shop." She turned to look at him. "I meant that it doesn't have to be Ottawa versus Elgin Street." He looked at her. He did not answer immediately. "You could come to Elgin Street," he said, "when the work requires it. And when it doesn't." He held her gaze for a moment. "That's a different conversation." She got in her car. He watched her pull out of the structure, then drove the 20 minutes home to the west end of Ottawa, with the windows down and the radio off, the way he had not driven in 4 years. That night, in the back office at Callaway Fine Woodworks, Lily looked up from her homework. "Dad, is Ms. Merritt going to keep coming to the shop?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The lamp on the desk was the same one his father had used in the house on Otter Lake Road. "Maybe, Peanut, maybe." October settled over Ottawa in long cold afternoons and the smell of leaf rot along the canal. Sloane found a flat on Lyon Street, 7 minutes from the Aldercroft office and 19 from Elgin Street. She did not call it anything. Neither did Nate. She came to the shop on Thursday afternoons, then on Saturdays. She had hired a new COO, a woman who had run operations for a small furniture manufacturer in Montreal for 11 years, and the two of them spent Tuesday mornings on the phone going through the Heritage Program reinstatement line by line. On Saturdays, she let Lily teach her how to use a hand plane, which Lily took very seriously and demonstrated with the gravity of someone who had been waiting for a willing student. Lily's first instruction, both hands on the plane, let the wood tell you where it wants to go. Sloane's first 3 passes left ridges. Her 4th came off clean. Lily said, without looking up, "That's better, Miss Sloane. Dad's going to be pleased." Nate watched from the bench and said nothing. He turned to lift a piece of stock from the rack behind him. And when he turned back, Sloane was showing Lily how to read the shaving to know if the angle was right. The way her father had showed her in his workshop in Kingston when she was 12 years old. On Sunday afternoons, she came along to Meech Lake, where Nate and Lily walked the North Trail when the weather held. Lily ran ahead, throwing pine cones at nothing in particular. Nate and Sloane walked behind her, 2 paces apart, the quiet between them not empty but held. My father used to say that good joinery is about long grain to long grain contact. The more surface you give it, the stronger the bond. He said that about woodworking. He said that about most things. They walked a long way without speaking. Lily turned and waved from a flat rock above the water, and the wave was large and unself-conscious, the way children wave when they are happy and don't know they're being watched. Before she left that evening, Nate handed her a small box, cedar, unfinished, with a fitted lid. She opened it. Inside was a single clock hand, brass, 12 inches from the movement of case number 1. The base was engraved, Heritage Collection, 2015, NC. What is this? A piece of the first case you finished. I kept it from the final fitting. Why are you giving it to me? Because you should have something that came from your own hands. She did not say thank you. She held the box for a moment, looked at him, and got in the car. She came back the following Thursday and the Thursday after that. 5 months later, on a Thursday evening in March, the Heritage Collection opened at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau. All 7 cases, installed along the east wing of the Grand Hall. The light in the room was warm and angled, the kind museum designers spend months getting right, and the walnut glowed under it in the particular way of wood that has been cared for. Lily was 9 now. She stood between Nate and Sloane in front of case number 4, a small notebook in her hand. She had been taking notes since they arrived, the case dimensions, the light angles, the reactions of the people who stopped and leaned in close to look at the joinery. The opening was attended by the museum's full board, the Aldercroft board, 3 journalists, and a retired craftsman from Cape Breton who had known Bernard Aldercroft since 1987 and had driven 9 hours to be there. Ray stood near the entrance and watched the room with his arms crossed and his expression of someone trying not to be visibly moved. He mostly managed it. Lily tugged Nate's sleeve. Dad, that man is reading the Maker's Mark. A man in his 60s was crouched beside case number 4, his reading glasses on, his face close to the lower rail. He straightened up and looked around the room until he found Nate, and he crossed to him directly. NC, the man said. Otter Lake Road. I knew your father. Nate shook his hand. He did not say much. He did not need to. Later, when the room had thinned and the caterers were beginning to pack, Lily fell asleep in the wide chair in the museum's side office, the notebook still in her hand. The attendant on duty brought a blanket and set it over her without waking her. Sloane and Nate stood in the grand hall. The cases were lit. The room was nearly empty. Their reflections were faint in the glass of case number 1. Your father would be proud of this. He'd be proud of the work. He'd be asking why case 3 is half an inch off center. Nate looked. Case 3 was exactly centered. She knew it was. She looked at him. I signed a transfer form giving you 7 pieces worth $4 million for the price of fuel. I told you to wash your shirt before meeting with my legal team. You did. And those 7 cases brought me here. He was quiet for a moment. It wasn't the cases. No, she said. It wasn't. They stood in the grand hall while the lights came down to their night setting and the cases held their warm, even glow. The woman who had run Aldercroft for 14 months in grief and managed pressure and navigated a company that had been quietly broken from the inside. She stood in the room where her father's vision had finally been properly realized, and she did not feel the need to name what she felt. She understood it well enough. Nate thought about the 7 dust-covered cases on the floor of the receiving bay on Elgin Street 9 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in October. He thought about his father's hands on the wood at Otter Lake Road. He thought about the 4 years he had run the shop alone with Lily, and the particular quality of the quiet in a workshop after everyone has gone home. He thought about the woman standing beside him now, and how she had walked into his shop, meaning to be the kind of person who did not wait for a mechanic to finish reading, and how she had become someone who knew how to hold a handplane and read a wood shaving and sit in the particular silence of a place where things were being made carefully. Maybe good joinery was about long grain to long grain contact. Maybe it was about the time it took to prepare the surfaces properly before you brought them together. Maybe that was what his father had meant. In the side office, Lily slept with the notebook still in her hand, the pages full of small, careful observations about a room her grandfather had imagined and her father had helped make real. Some things take exactly as long as they need to take, not longer, not less. I think about Nate standing alone in that receiving bay on Elgin Street, moving blankets off 7 clock cases that had been signed away for the cost of a courier transfer. He didn't make a phone call to a lawyer. He didn't post anything. He just read the grain on the wood, recognized his own dovetail joint, and started figuring out what came next. That's the part that stays with me. There's a version of that story where a person in this position gets loud about it, calls the press, threatens litigation, makes sure everyone knows what was taken from him. And honestly, nobody would blame him. What happened to Nate in 2016 was genuinely wrong. His severance was withheld while his wife was sick. His designs were used to protect someone else's fraud. He walked away from work he had given years of his life to, and he got nothing for it. But Nate understood something that I think most of us figure out slowly, if we figure it out at all. The quality of your character isn't proven in the moments when things are going well. It's proven in what you do when you have every reason to be bitter and you choose not to be. He chose to fix the cases because they deserve to be fixed, not to make a point, not to set a trap. Because the work itself had value, and no transfer form could change that. What strikes me about Sloane is that she was lied to from the beginning, and she eventually told the truth anyway. That took something real. She had walked into her father's company carrying grief in one hand and a balance sheet in the other. And Voss had been careful about what she saw and what she didn't. By the time she started asking the right questions, the easier path would have been to file those questions away and keep moving. She didn't. She drove to Gatineau on her own. She unlocked a box she had been avoiding for months. She read what was inside it, and then she acted on it, even when the acting was hard and the outcome wasn't guaranteed. That's the kind of clear-headedness that doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from being willing to be wrong about what you thought you knew, and then doing the harder thing once you know better. And then there's Ray Okafor, driving in from Gatineau in a truck with a cracked mirror to sort brass fittings for free. Nobody asked him to do that in a way that could be called a real ask. Nate made one phone call. Ray came. That kind of loyalty is built over time, through the small, consistent things, the kind of person you are when nothing is at stake, which is the only real way to be the kind of person who shows up when everything is. I think about Lily bringing Coco into the bay every night. She didn't understand the full weight of what her father was carrying, but she understood that it mattered, and she showed up for it anyway, in the way that a child can. Steadily, without drama, with a marshmallow floating slightly off-center. Some things take exactly as long as they need to take. The 7 clock cases sat in that bay for 6 weeks because that's how long it takes to do it right. Nate's name wasn't cleared in a conversation or a confrontation. It was restored through the work itself, through 6 weeks of 14-hour days and a finished piece of walnut that spoke for itself on a dyno mount in a museum in Gatineau. I don't think you can shortcut that. Not really. And I'm not sure you'd want to.